Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Check In with the Doctor. I am, of course, Chris White, your host, and we have an unbelievably special guest this week, a man who, frankly, doesn't probably need an introduction with my audience. He's the founder and CEO of Mastering Technical Sales. He's the author of a book by the same name, and in fact, author of a recent book, The Sales Engineer Manager's Handbook, which I have a copy of in my hand, Mr. John Kerr. John, how are you, sir? Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Chris, thanks for that wonderful non-introduction welcome. I very much appreciate it. I am doing fantastic and thrilled to be here and have this discussion with you. Really looking forward to it.
Well, John, thank you so much. And I, you and I met, I think officially probably just over 2 years ago when I was writing my book. And I told you then that you were someone and are someone that I had looked up to for years. And I have watched you and your business and what you did and what you do and thought, man, I want to be there someday. So it's really an honor and a delight to have you. Now, John, I always ask my guests, and I always ask them to introduce themselves in the unlikely event that anybody doesn't know who they are. Now, you may not even fall into that category. So I'm going to ask you this way. When you meet someone for the first time who maybe doesn't know you and doesn't know who you do, how do you introduce yourself and what you do?
So I normally say, hi, I'm John Kerr. I'm the author and managing director or CEO of a company called Mastering Technical Sales. And if they're not really in the industry, I say, basically what my company does is we teach geeks how to explain geeky things to business people. So the business people will give the geeky people and their salespeople money. And they go, oh boy, let me tell you about this experience I had. And so that is how I have solved what I used to call the cocktail party question. Could you meet someone at a cocktail party, standing there holding your gin and tonic, say, what do you do? I'm a sales engineer. And you'd get about 2 sentences into an explanation and they'd look down at their drink and say, excuse me, I need to top this up. And they'd disappear. So I went with the geek speaking normal English or what language of your choice route. And that seems to go very well. So that's who I am and what I do. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love it. And by the way, those of us who understand that, we're proud to be proclaimed geeks in most cases, right? So we know that under the covers we're propeller heads, but we want to, we don't want to project that when we're engaged with customers. So I absolutely love that. John, it's been about 20 years since you first published Mastering Technical Sales. Now, what is the actual anniversary date? It's sometime this year, yes?
Yes, the book came out, I believe, about now, actually, in 2001. It was a long time ago. So that was 2001. The second edition was 2008, and the third edition 2014. And I'm actively working on the fourth edition now, which should come out very early next year if I meet my commitment to the publisher.
Interesting.
20 years, yeah.
That's incredible. Right? Now, when you wrote the book in 2001, did you have some sense of the success you would have?
Not a clue. The genesis story of the book was really written out of frustration. I was sitting in the back of a ballroom at Atlanta, Georgia, going through my fourth sales training process of my career. There were 100 salespeople in the room, and maybe myself and 40 of my SEs. I was a director at the time, and we get to Friday lunchtime, and I looked at one of my managers sitting next to me, and I said, "Why are we here? It's 5 days of training. Only a day and a half of it is relevant to us, and we can absorb it 3 times faster than most of these salespeople in the room." And the manager just looked at me and said, "If you're so smart, why don't you write a book about it?" It's like, that's a great idea. So I sat down and wrote the first edition of this, just because no one else had written anything like it.
That's amazing.
And I had no idea that 20 years later, I would be at the helm of what I think is probably together with Up to Speed, the largest international provider of professional skills to sales engineers in the world.
Yeah.
it's humbling. It really is.
Yeah. Well, and for sure, I mean, and, you know, I think I wrote this in one of my posts. I mean, I think of you and Peter as sort of the pioneer, Peter Cohen as the pioneers in this space. I mean, you two really have paved the way for others like myself to jump into this game. So now I know in order to publish a quote, second edition or next edition, it's sort of, you know, in the business, so to speak, it's perceived or believed that there has to be a 35% delta from the previous
Correct.
edition to officially call it a new edition, which means you've got 35% new material that you're adding to the fourth edition. Do you care to share some of the things that you're writing about that are in this next edition?
Sure. There you go. My prop. So everything that's got a color on it, whether it's orange or yellow, is basically brand new material. So I think I'm up to about 60%.
Wow.
So if you think about what life was like as an SE in 2014, so much has changed over the last 7-8 years. I mean, a lot stayed the same. You know, you could say that the whole cloudification of the process, right? We were just getting started with it back then. Virtual interaction is far more important, you know, pandemic or not, than it was back then. The rise of the subject matter expert, a lot of different advances in visual selling and demos and sales methodologies. And, you know, just getting rid of outdated references. So as I go through it chapter by chapter, I'm kind of shocked in terms of how much new content. And some areas like business value discovery, or, you know, how to create and structure the perfect demo, I've actually had to take a chapter that was long and split it into two because there's so much new content.
Interesting. Now, how much of that accelerated as a result of the pandemic? If you've got, let's say, 60% changed, was it sort of a hockey stick as a result of or after the pandemic?
No, which might be a surprising and somewhat controversial answer. I mean, if you think about it, Chris, 2 years ago, if you talk to a large enterprise software or hardware company, at least in the Americas, probably 40 to 45% of their interactions with clients were done virtually anyway.
Absolutely.
And maybe 25% in EMEA and 10 to 15% in JPAC. So certainly that number has risen since, you know, April 2020. But there was always that need for, you know, virtual best practices, for example. I think this has just emphasized the requirement for it. And in most parts, it was customers who need training as opposed to SEs who needed training about the technology. So it's a little bit of a catalyst and an accelerant, but I don't think as much as people, when you reflect upon it, as people would think.
Particularly for us sales engineers, I work with technology companies, but I also work with some companies that aren't necessarily technology companies. And I've been saying, look, you know, I had my first quote WebEx account in 2005, right? I mean, I've been giving web demos for a long, long time. Now, it wasn't until the pandemic where I think the video stream and being on video became almost an expectation, right? And my wife jokes to me, like, before the pandemic, you never used to get up and take a shower and put on, you know, like a nice pair of clothes every day, right? And it's I stopped traveling, and yet I started getting dressed every day when I was at home. So, you know, like it has changed, I think, that. And I think the people that we're dealing with, their level of sort of virtual meeting IQ has risen a little bit, right? And I think expectations have risen, but I see what you're saying there completely. Incidentally, John, let me pause. Folks, I just want to say hello to anybody who might be with us. Alvin, and Alvin, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Regas is with us. He's eager to get the fourth copy. Folks, we don't have visibility into who's actually with us. So if any of you want to say hello, ask John a question, you're welcome to do so. We'll you know, cover as many as we can. John, we talked about the 4 editions and the number of changes. what hasn't changed? And I'm leading the witness a little bit because I certainly have a few ideas of my own. But when you think back on 20 years, are there some things that simply have not changed in terms of best practice and our role as a sales engineer? And if so, what are some of those things?
A lot is remarkably the same. In fact, Chris, if you look at your best practices, right, that you have in your book, and the 6Ps, as I call them,
Yeah.
a lot of that fundamental stuff, the blocking and tackling, as my American friends love to say over here, really hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that you should conduct business value discovery, and don't talk technology until you understand what the business problem is. A lot of the logistics and the planning and the account strategy of building customer relationships. So all the common sense infrastructure stuff that surrounds what we do as an everyday job, that really hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I looked, I have this little business value discovery planning sheet that we give out in some of our classes. Scarily, the very first version of that, and I date myself, that we constructed, I think, in 1988. When I worked at Oracle, using whatever, like WordPerfect and VisiCalc or something. Right? So I mean, basic common sense stuff does. In 10 years from now, is there going to be an amazingly new way to conduct discovery or to plan out a demo? Well, no, there isn't. The technology that's going to be behind it, though, will be amazingly different.
Right.
I think that's what's driven the change.
Right. It's the technology, it's the automation, and our customers are changing, right? I mean, our customers are far more informed than they were certainly when you and I first got into this role. And so as a result, our role is changing also. What are some of the most common mistakes that you still see out in the field when you work with sales engineer teams?
Well, so let me tell you a little example around that that goes back to my very first call as a sales engineer.
Okay.
Back then, I was called a sales support specialist.
Okay.
And I'm not even going to embarrass myself and tell you how many years ago that was. And so I was a customer, and I got hired by a software company and got this job as a sales engineer. So I went through boot camp, and I knew the product really well because I was a customer, but I didn't know all the salesy stuff.
Of course.
So I go out on my very first call with the sales manager at the time, this fellow called Joel Banner. And I'm doing the demo. They're throwing questions at me. I'm like answering and showing them stuff. And I walk out into the parking lot with Joel, and he puts his arm around me and he looks at me and says, "John, just remember, you're not paid by the word." And that advice has stuck with me for decades.
That's really good.
You're not paid by the word. You're paid to help the salesperson, encourage the customer to buy more of your stuff. So actually, it's adopting more of a minimalistic approach as it is to just throwing everything at the customer. So I think that's one of the number one mistakes is we just talk too much.
Yeah. Well, and it reminds me, I don't know if you've seen some of my posts about the MVD. We talk about the MVP, the minimum viable product. I like to talk about, encourage people to build and deliver the MVD, the minimum viable demo, right? Show the least, most concise example or demonstration that supports the story you're trying to tell. And I just love that notion. You're not paid by the word. And I add, and I'll add to that. There's no bonus points for speed for the mistakes that are right. Like we speed through the demo. Why? In many cases, because we've got too much to show and not enough time, right? And we need to scream through the demo. When you deal with teams and when organizations reach out to you, what are the challenges they're most looking to have you and your team help them address, and the skills that they're looking to develop?
Usually that comes from, for example, the CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer, or a senior salesperson. And I'll ask them to tell me about their sales engineering organization. And they'll say, no, we have great sales engineers, right? They know the product inside and out, backwards and forwards, all the speeds and feeds, but, right? And it's always the piece that comes after the but that organizations like mine and yours can help them with. And usually the but is, no, but under the slightest bit of pressure, they revert to talking tech. And they don't spend enough time figuring out what are the pains and the gains of the customer. How can you help them make money, save money, mitigate risk, time, money, people, all the little triumvirates that we tell them to attach to. So that's normally the number one thing. And then behind that, close behind that, is the relationship selling. So it's encouraging the SEs to become more proactive and to build relationships and become that trusted advisor, right? The other book, whoops, wrong way. The other book there, right? I got to get used to this video mirroring. So the other book up there, which is how do you build those deep relationships with the customers, and not just the techies, but the middle management, executives, and the business people as well. So they're probably the two things. Rarely does someone come to me and say, hey, we need to do a better job with our demos, or we need to do a better job with the X or Y. It's normally something higher level and more conceptual, and then you have to conduct our form of discovery to figure out what the problem actually is. And I saw Alvin in the comment. The goal is to get the customers to talk more than we do. And I think that's it, right? You judge a really great SE by the quality of the questions that they ask, as opposed to the quality of the answers that they provide.
Well said. Well said. And I love what you mentioned about when there's the least bit of pressure, right? We tend to be great when everything goes to plan, everything goes to script, right? We know what we've got to say, and things are smooth sailing until we hit that road bump, until we get that question that we didn't see coming, right? And that's really where our skills come to bear. And I know you even identified this, or sort of called this out in my book. I believe that deals are either made or broken, right? We make or break the deal by how we respond to questions and how we handle the objections and the curveballs that are thrown our way. So, and you're right, we tend to default to what just comes natural to us, right?
Yeah.
So
the questions piece is really important. I mean, our research has shown that if you start thinking about, so I think objection handling is a horrible term, right? So objection handling is what salespeople do. I believe as SEs, we answer questions. There's a subtle psychological difference. And you know what? Somewhere like 85% of the questions that customers ask, right? There's no intent behind it, right? They just want to know what the answer is. You don't have to think too hard about how you're going to respond. They want an answer. Now sometimes it's a competitive dig, or they're trying to put someone else's finger on the trigger, and there's all the politics. But 5 times out of 6, they ask you a question, they just want an answer because they want to know how it works, or does it do something. And we kind of lose sight of that sometimes, I think, in all the fancy training that we give people.
Right. Well, and part of the mistake we make to that point is we forget to just answer the question, and we want to dive into the product and click away, right? And the person, after 10 minutes, the person says, so the answer was yes.
Yeah. And, as you go up the hierarchy in terms of who you present to, that becomes more and more important. I mean, if I dial back to when I was an IT executive, because I've been on the other side of the table as well, and talking to my fellow execs, sometimes when we ask a question, you can just say yes. You don't have to say, let me show you how that works.
Exactly.
So sometimes you can tell and you don't have to show.
Exactly. Well said. John, let me pause just for a moment and welcome anybody who may have joined us mid-flight. Folks, we're talking to John Kerr today, founder and CEO of Mastering Technical Sales and author of numerous books. We don't have eyes on you, so if you want to ask John a question or just chime in and say hello, I invite you to do so. John, you mentioned your book, The Trusted Advisor, and I didn't actually mention that one. Now, how does that one differ from the other books that we've talked about?
So the third edition has a chapter of about 8 pages that briefly describes what a trusted advisor sales engineer is, without going into a whole bunch of detail. But if you think about the number of times that you've been at a sales kickoff, an executive meeting, and some high-ranking official comes in and says, oh, you've got to become a trusted advisor to your clients, get closer to them so we can get a bigger share of their wallet and everything else. But they never tell you how to do it. And so I decided to write 500 words or 1,000 words to describe what a trusted advisor is. And I ended up with 45,000 in the book. It's not a simple topic, right? No, it's 15 letters, 5 syllables. But what is a trusted advisor? So,
Indeed. Incidentally, Tony Franchetic is on too. It's good to see you, Tony.
Yeah.
So can you briefly answer that question? What is a trusted advisor, or how do you become a trusted advisor?
Well, so first read the book, right?
Of course.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon, folks, everywhere. No, it's interesting because in our trusted advisor workshops that we do, you can ask 16 people for a definition of a trusted advisor, and you get like 53 responses back. So there's no one single 2-sentence description of it. I would say that basically you are someone who operates in the best interest of your customer at all times. And then we break that down and we say, okay, we're engineers, so we like numbers, we like equations. So we use something called the trust equation. And we say trust is composed of 5 factors. So credibility, reliability, intimacy, self-orientation, and positivity. So I think CRISP was the acronym. And then in terms of what do you actually have to do if you're doing a demo, or if you're running through discovery, or if you're in front of an executive, that helps you build up those factors. And the higher the trust score that you get out the end, the more you can do with the customer. So if you utilize the trust equation, you can see, if your trust score is, say, 5 or above, that person's probably going to walk you into their manager's office and make an introduction. If your score is 7 or above, they'll do something else. And so the clients who have implemented this and hooked it into Salesforce or whatever else have discovered some amazing metrics that happen if you truly focus on becoming a trusted advisor. Everyone says they do it. I mean, everyone says they do.
Of course.
Yes, because who doesn't?
It's a buzzword. It's
a buzzword. Yes. Right. So diversion. If you have trusted advisor as your job title in LinkedIn or on your business card, don't. The only person who call you a trusted advisor is your client, not you.
Exactly.
So it drives me nuts. And so we break it down. And so we think that as you engage with your clients, what does it mean? And that kind of brings out probably one of the larger changes psychologically that's happened with SEs over the last 10 to 15 years, which is as we've been asked to become more consultative, to use that word, it's no longer the case that, you're the SE, you build a relationship with the techies and maybe their immediate manager, and I, as the salesperson and my line of management, will build a relationship with the mid-level managers, the execs, and the business people. What the trusted advisor and the trust equation tells you is whoever is in the best position to build that relationship should go do it. Okay? So there's no reason why a 27-year-old SE cannot become the prime contact point and the trusted advisor for a CTO, COO, CIO in an organization, just because they've got the bond and the hook to pull on. So all those old interactions, relationships, even in some parts of the world where job titles are everything, they're going out the window.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
It's a good thing, and it's one of the things that makes the role of an SE even more exciting.
Indeed. Well, particularly because I believe hierarchies are flattening, and the social networks are making connections so easy, and technology changes so fast. The younger generation is far more up on and well educated on the current technologies than guys like you and me. So of course, even the CIOs are going to look to some of the younger folks to be trusted advisors if they position themselves in that manner. And it's interesting because when I think of trusted advisor, there's two words in particular that come to mind. One is other centered. What I like to think of as other centered, meaning you, the customer, are the priority in the conversation. You are the priority in my recommendation and all the engagements. That's number one. Number two is courage. The courage to say at times things that might not even be popular, but are important because they're in their best interest. So I love the definition you gave. By the way, John, let's just give a few shout outs real quick. Sam is with us.
Oh, hey, Sam.
You may know Sam. He's one of the founders of the NSSE. Sam, it's good to see. I love the example you shared. And Mike Sanders chimed in. Fantastic conversation on the trusted advisor. Mike, thanks for being with. Good to see you.
Yeah. So Chris, if you just look at those 2 points you raised, that basically nails two of the factors. So the tough conversation comes from C, credibility. And so does the customer believe you? Are you willing to have that tough conversation and say, you know what, you might not want to do it that way because, and then the orientation is from self-orientation, right? So one of my other customers says that customer before commission. And so CR and I are all positive things that are on the top of the equation. Self-orientation or being selfish is on the bottom because it's a bad thing. So you want to reduce that.
Yeah. One of my previous guests said, my attitude whenever I'm dealing with a customer is there's no me without you. So you're the priority, right? And I just love that attitude. So John, you started your career as a sales engineer after having been, from the sounds of it, a sort of a super user, a power user of the software. They recruited you to become a sales engineer. At what point did you get into management?
Well, so first of all, call out. I started my life as a chemical engineer crawling around an oil refinery, and then decided that, wow, there's software out there that makes my life a lot easier. Well, we're getting an echo here, or I can hear it. So the software out there can make my life a lot easier, and that's how I got into the business. I first became a manager, actually as a chemical engineer, where IBM created this thing called a help desk. And they needed somebody to man a help desk for the engineers out in the refinery to solve their technology problems. And they put me in charge of that, along with 4 people who were 20 years older than I was. So that just went okay, but it taught me some interesting things.
It's a challenge. I've been there before. Yeah. It's a challenge to be in a manager role with you when you have a team of people 10, 20 years your senior. That's a challenge.
I first became an SE manager, I think, when I was like in my late 20s. And so I was in charge of 5 or 6 other SEs. And then over time, fled from company to company and rose up the ranks. I became a senior manager, director, VP. Went outside a couple of times to become a CIO, IT guy. Hated that. went back into the business again, and then eventually just decided, enough is enough. This professional skills training for sales engineers is a real thing, and there's money to be made on it. And man, I felt so much better about it. I truly believe I have one of the best jobs in the world.
Yeah.
Well,
it took me 50 plus years to get into that same business, but I have to admit it feels like I'm semi-retired because I enjoy what I'm doing so much. So I do agree. Now, when you first got into an SE management position, and I know it's been a little while, but as you reflect on that sort of first experience, what were some of the things that you found to be most challenging moving in from in essence an IC role to a management position?
Oh, wow. So there is a complete chapter in the book about the 7 mistakes that rookie SE managers make and don't do this, because I made every single one of them. So you have to realize that not everybody is like you. So frequently, even now, people get promoted to become an SE manager because they're a really good SE.
Of course.
And make everybody like you as opposed to the leadership skills they exhibit. And then there's actually a fabulous book written by a guy called Marshall Goldsmith called What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Well, exactly. I know it. Yes.
And it's really about letting go of what got you into your current position, because you still need to move, upwards and forwards. So I think realizing not everybody is like you. Let the people out there on the sharp end in direct contact with the customer, make the day-to-day tactical decisions, and your job is to nudge and guide. And then above all, I think, unless you've got a small team, your role is not to become the super SE.
Right.
If you're going on a call because you are the super SE, then you got to kind of eventually question that after a while. Your role is to develop and serve your people, to run your business as a business, and to delight your clients. And then on top of that is to manage yourself. And that's what you should be doing as a manager. And anything that falls outside of that, I think, is noise.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned run your team as a business, or run your function as a business. Talk a little bit more about that. I know, because I've read the book. I know you talk a lot about that in the book, but pull out, if you will, a few of those nuggets and share with the folks listening.
Sure. So many SE organizations run in reactive mode, in that they cater either to the salesperson or the customer or the partner who is yelling and screaming the loudest about doing something. If they do use metrics, it's what's happened in the past as opposed to what's likely to happen in the future. And then most metrics that are available to SE leaders without any formal plan usually revolve around revenue and pipeline, buckets, consumption, all the cloud metrics that we have now, ARR and so on, MRR. But there's all the other things around learning and knowledge, around process, around customer. And by looking at these kind of metrics, we talk about ROPE, right? Return on pre-sales effectiveness. Are my people doing the right thing? How do I know they're doing the right thing? And if they are, how can I make it even better? And if you can't answer those questions, you got no right to sit in a QBR, and listen to reps drone on about what's in their pipeline. And VPs beat them up, right? So you need to be able to contribute, and that's how you turn your organization from being reactive into proactive. And I remember years ago sitting in a QBR and having a rep stand there and just point at my organization and say, hey, listen, I can't get the pre-sales resource I need in order to be able to move my opportunities through the pipeline. And I looked at him and I said, Andrew, looking at this, out of the 53 reps that we are currently supporting, you are number 9 in terms of consumption of SE time. Wow. Yet you've got the 46th weakest pipeline.
Wow.
I think the problem might lie somewhere else. If I didn't have that data, then I'm subject to the emotional whims of sales leaders.
Yeah.
And face it, they're better at selling than the average SE or SE leader is, especially when it comes to the emotional sell. So having some data to make decisions and drive your organization helps. RFP response rate, POC closure rate, number of demos done, amount of time spent in a stage, blockers, all these things. If you can't measure them, how do you know if your people are working on the right thing?
Yep.
So that's what rule 2 is: just run your business as a business and become proactive about it and take charge, as opposed to being reactive and just running around putting out fires.
Yep. Data, not drama, as I like to say. Right.
Yes. Well, there's always drama, but you kind of need you need the data to pour water on the fire to get rid of the drama.
It is a sales organization,
yeah.
So there's always drama in a sales organization. there's no doubt about that. And what's great talking about the metrics is there are so many new products flooding the market and investment flooding the market. And actually, I'm going to put that on the shelf for a minute. We'll revisit that. You mentioned that's rule number 2. Do you care to share rule number 3 out of the handbook?
Sure. Well, actually, let's recap the whole thing. So rule number 1 is develop and serve your people. So if you're an SE director and you've got 50 people working for you, if you make each and every one of them 5% more efficient by getting rid of noise and friction in the sales cycle, suddenly you've got 2.5 extra people. So that's kind of your role there. So develop and serve. And so we use a concept there called RADAR, right? Recruit, attract, develop, advance, and retain. And that's the SE life cycle. Rule 2 is run your business as a business. And then the rule 3 is delight and serve your customers. What's interesting is, as SEs, we have multiple customers, because we have the salespeople that we work with. They're certainly our customers. We have the end user customers who give our company money, right, monthly or annually. And then potentially we have partners as well who are out there, feet on the street, selling our stuff. And that's just the 3 major stakeholders or customers. And then we have many other. So I think SEs probably have more customers than any other organization in the whole company.
No doubt.
And then layered on top of that, rule 0, because we forgot it, so we added it afterwards. If it's good enough for the laws of thermodynamics, it's good enough for SEs.
Indeed.
Is manage yourself, because if you can't manage yourself and set a good example for the rest of your team, what's the point? So the analogy there is, it's kind of like upgrading your operating system, right? So you're on whatever, like Chris 4.3 right now. And so there's always improvements that you can make, and people are trying to hack you in terms of utilizing your time and getting you to do things you don't want to. So, how do you upgrade from Chris 4.3 to Chris 4.4 and make yourself better and set a better example? So that's rule 0, which is manage yourself, which layers on top of everything else.
I love that. The upgrades are usually expensive, but worth it.
I shudder to think what version I am now, and I probably lost a lot of functionality at some point. But yeah,
I actually like that thought. I may have to give that some thought. Like where were the version upgrades along my career? I could probably sort of point to some different significant version operating system upgrades, to use your term. I like that. John, I have a question sort of kicking around my mind around ICs considering moving into management. And I'm going to ask it in sort of a 2-part question. The first part is, do you think that some ICs, and I almost don't like that term, but some sales engineers who are particularly effective in the field, are there some people that maybe just aren't wired correctly, or they're not necessarily fit to be a manager, and they're probably better suited to stay in an individual contributor role? And if yes, what are some of the things that someone might identify about themselves that would indicate either they're well suited and ready for management, or the opposite, that maybe management isn't the right move for them?
Yeah. So reflecting back on our conversation from 20 minutes ago, the answer is yes. Right? So we'll start with that. And it's a mixture of both ability and desire. Again, in the manager's book, we have a survey, and so we surveyed thousands of SEs in some fairly large companies. They said, 30 months from now, what do you want to be? And 40% more or less said, I want to become a manager. And you ask them why, and some really had a desire to go into management, and some just felt, well, it's what I should do. There was also a fairly significant proportion, maybe 30%, who said, I just want to become a better SE. Not just, I want to become a better SE, and to go up the SE path and become, senior principal, master principal, super master architect, and all the other titles out there. And I think that's a great thing. And in a number of companies now, if you are a master principal SE, I mean, that's the equivalent to director level in terms of pay and compensation and everything else, or distinguished engineer, as the old called it. So that's great. Others want to go into sales, cross over to the dark side, product management, leave the profession altogether. So not everybody needs to be a manager, nor do they wish to be. And I know a number of people kind of from my generation who kind of rose up the ranks, became directors and VPs, and are now individual contributors again, because that's where they have the most fun.
It's interesting. I'm reminded of a gentleman who's a good friend of mine, and he started out as my client, and he was a VP with a reasonably sized technology company, and we did a large engagement with them, and it led to a big piece of business. And after working together for about 5 years, he decided to leave that company and position and become a sales engineer, an IC, individual contributor sales engineer, and he's been there for 3 or 4 years and absolutely loves it. So, and I do have people who tell me, I feel sometimes like I should be looking for something different or bigger, like I feel pressure to move into management, or I feel pressure to move into sales. And my response is, the sales engineer profession for the right person, in my opinion, is the perfect role and the perfect job. If you've got the right mix of skills, you're very well paid, you're highly regarded by sales and product, and respected by and revered by your customers. There should be no reason to look for anything else if you just know in your heart of hearts that this is the right profession and career for you. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, if you wake up in the morning and that's what lights you up, I mean, as I say, I think I have one of the best jobs in the world. And when I was an SE, that's the way I felt. I have to say though, I do not miss the corporate world of being a VP of sales engineering.
Yes.
So I miss the mentoring and the development aspect, but all the other stuff, wondering about like which salesperson is going to come screaming into my office and who's going to do what and who's resigning and which HR person is upset and what product feature is slipping. Like, I am so glad to be out of that.
I must admit, I agree with that sentiment. I agree with that sentiment a great deal.
That's welcome. But yeah, I truly believe, as you said, being an SE is one of the best jobs in the world. You are talking to people, you are solving problems, hopefully different problems every week and every month, meeting a whole bunch of different people. And that's a really wonderful job to have.
Yeah. What was your favorite part of the role when you were a sales engineer out in the field working with customers? What was your favorite part of the job?
Oh gosh, I don't know if there's one making me choose. So the one obvious one was the thrill of victory, right? I mean, every sales engineer does have that little bit of sales in it, and anyone who knows me knows I am an extremely competitive person. So the thrill of winning was quite something.
Yeah.
But I would love it when a customer would look at me and say, "Oh, I see what you mean."
Yes.
And you spark some great idea, some thought, some concept in their head.
Yes.
And then a little bit later on, after whatever product or service that we had sold them, it was actually an operation and it worked. And you go talk to them 6-12 months later on, and you got that feeling of satisfaction that you had made the pains go away, the gains had materialized, and something good had happened. So I guess that's the 1, 2, 3 into what really used to excite me.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Incidentally, I don't know if you know Kerry Sokolsky. He's another one of the sort of the newer sort of members of the pre-sales coaching training community, if you will. Kerry, it's good to see you. But always glad to have you on. No, John, when you mentioned that, I'm so with you. I think if we were to ask 100 sales engineers, what do you like the most? Obviously, we'd get different answers, but I think there'd probably be about 5 answers that are pretty consistent, to include certainly presenting and delivering the message, right? Working with customers, problem solving, seeing our customer. I think anybody who's been in this profession knows that moment where all of a sudden the lights come on for the customer and they get it. And then to go back 6 months later or 12 months later and see that not only have they implemented successfully, but they have found success. And in some cases, it's even better than they were expecting. And many times our customers find better ways to use our products even than we imagine. I mean that's one thing, that's
those off-brand uses, as I call them, are amazing, and they make for great customer stories, because then you can go back and share that with other customers.
Exactly.
And that's another part of the value of the SE is
Exactly.
knowing and understanding that stuff, which is why you always want to be in contact with your customers, even after you think you're done with them. You're not, because you can
Well said.
learn so much.
Well, and that's an interesting comment. I mean, more and more, I think pre-sales and post-sales, pre-sales and customer success, those, those, particularly now with SaaS, obviously, I mean, those lines are blurring. We mentioned a moment ago, or we touched a moment ago on software and the investment in software and vendors specifically targeting pre-sales and sales engineer leaders. I'd love to put our toe back in that pool for a minute. I think for sales engineer managers, it's both a blessing and a challenge, because I think for a lot of SE managers, we've sort of had to figure it out on our own, pull stuff out of Salesforce and manage spreadsheets over here and tie things together. And now there's tools that do this. But the challenge is, where do we invest? Because we can invest in a lot of different places. What's your sort of view of that technology landscape? And obviously, I don't necessarily want to call out any vendor names per se, but what are some of the things that you think, or the advice? What is some of the advice that you are giving to managers in terms of considering automation?
Wow. So 3 areas there. So one is AI ML is having an impact in practically every job in the world, including us as SEs. So over the past few years, even longer than that, what I'll call the low end part of the job has become increasingly automated. Right? So RFP, RFI responses, although you don't get a finished product, they're a long way along. Automated, unattended demos. Second area, AI monitoring of proofs of concepts up in the cloud, right? So you have a bot monitoring what's going on, and the bot notifies the SE if something is going off the rails. So all those kind of things that, back when I were a lad, right? We didn't have that. So that is fantastic. Secondly, you're the demo doctor, right? So let's talk about demos for a bit. So there's all the technology around automating demos, the Consensuses of the world and others, and also the application of technology to that. So how are you going to make demos more experiential? There are companies now working with holograms, right? Holographic demos. So there's a bunch more coming down the pike, as it were, for experiential demos. So I think that's crucial too. And then thirdly is around the metrics themselves.
Yes.
And so no longer is everything driven through, Excel or Google Sheet extracts from Salesforce. There are actually products out there that will help you monitor, POCs, RFPs, time, resource consumption, and allocation, learning and development. So all of those make the life of the leader easier, as long as that information is used appropriately, right? So I always say there's a difference between, for example, time measurement and activity measurement. Asking SEs to record their time, I think, is a horrible idea. Because one, they will say, how come the salespeople don't have to do it, right? And then secondly, is that really what you want, someone who's earning, in some cases, $250,000 or more here in the US to be doing? But activity is different, because you do want to know what people are working on. So being able to gather that information and to look at it in terms of, are my people working on the right thing, I think is pretty important. And then use it to kick out. Right? So a lot of times we as sales engineers, we are the organization of last resort. I think it's one of my famous phrases, in that if no one else in the company does it to make the customer happy, we'll do it, because we're inherently pleasers and fixers, right? I mean, that's the engineering bit of it. So quite often that encourages bad behavior from other parts of the organization, maybe, post-sales consulting, support, whatever. So being able to use that data to kick out and fix things that are detracting from the core focus and deliverables of the SE organization is essential. And I think that helps SE leaders do it. One of my clients did this around escalations, and if you're an SE leader and you're not getting involved in escalations, like, amazing, but almost everybody else is. So they looked at why it was happening, why they were getting involved, how much time was being spent on it. Then they went back and sat down with the VP of support and didn't totally fix it, but they made it much better. And basically it freed up the equivalent of 10% of their SE time to go do more productive things like sell stuff.
Yeah.
But if they didn't have a monitoring and measurement system, the SE VP would never have the data to sit down with the VP of support and do it. So you can't use the data to kick down and yell at an individual SE because they haven't updated Salesforce, or they haven't done 3 demos this week, or they haven't filled out this discovery form, right? That's pointless. They're professionals. You got to trust them. To use it to kick out and fix other parts of the organization is the essential reasoning for having a lot of this data.
Absolutely. Well, and the word that comes to mind again, you've used it already a couple times, is proactive.
Yes.
Right. It's proactive. And it's interesting. You mentioned the 6 Ps that my framework is made of. And I've, of course, as I go, I think of other sort of, sort of habits or Ps that I should have included. And proactive is one that keeps coming up again and again and again. So incidentally, John, just a quick shout out to Cheryl Staring. She's one of my fellow PSC DC leadership council members, and actually a neighbor not too far away from here. So Cheryl, thanks for chiming in. It's good to see you. John, we've almost been talking for an hour, if you can believe that. So the time has gone by very fast. Now, I have a few questions that I like to ask people at the end. If I can go ahead, do you have something?
I have one thing I have to do, because I've been sitting here and people have been seeing this thing on the t-shirt,
yes.
right? So I do have to show people the t-shirt. Right? So there you go.
I love it. Keep calm, and let the sales engineer handle it. Yeah, that's fantastic. And can people pick up one of these shirts on your website? Is this something that you actually make available to people?
Not yet, but I think we might start that up as another business. Business line. I actually had these made for a client a few years ago to use as prizes, and I found this one when I was cleaning out my closet the other day. It's like,
that's fantastic.
I have to make some more of those. So
that's perfect. I love that. Yeah, I think I may if you decide to turn that into a business, let me know if you're looking for angel investors. I may jump in on that train.
Deal.
So John, I'm gonna, in a minute, I'll invite you to share any closing thoughts. But before we get there, we'll do a bit of a lightning round.
Okay.
And I ask 3 questions that my guests don't necessarily see coming. The first is, I'm gonna invite you to think back to a demo that you gave that went particularly poorly. And if you the great John Kerr, who's been teaching and training and helping probably tens of thousands of sales engineers, if you can think of one scenario in which you gave a demo that didn't go well, what was it and why did it not go particularly well?
Wow. So many mistakes to choose from over my career. That's the cool thing of helping other people not make the same mistakes that I did.
Indeed.
So aside from like the obvious stuff, like demos crashing and my Oracle database dying and everything, it was normally because we were doing what I call 0-day discovery, which is that we had no idea really what the customer wanted.
Yeah.
The rep came up to me and said, "Hey, John, how you doing?" and put their arms around me, which is always a bad sign. Said, "Got this hot prospect. They just want us to come on site, give them like a couple of hour overview of the product and what it does, and we'll take it from there." I was like, "Oh, come on." So I think Peter Cohan calls it the 3-hour tour or the show up and throw up.
Yeah.
So most of those normally go badly. And there's also occasions when, like one I remember where the rep was trying to redirect me in a demo, and I have to admit I didn't have a lot of respect for this rep, and I thought that he was wrong, so I just kept going the way I was going, which turned out to be the biggest mistake possible because he was reading the room and the body language, and I was not, and I just totally tanked that one. So
That's
So I did not utilize the other people in the room to give me
Indeed.
cues and guidelines, because again, back to a previous conversation, I was so focused on my technology and what I was going to deliver.
Yeah.
Plus I rushed. You know, the number one reason for a poor 30-minute demo is that you have 45 minutes of content.
Exactly. We have too much to deliver in not enough time. So I love that. My second question, I'm actually going to deviate from my normal question, but I think for you, this is a very, I hope, very appropriate one for you. If you could say anything to the account execs that the sales engineers that you work with or coach, teach, work with, what would you say to them to help them better understand the sales engineers that they are paired with and collaborating with?
I would tell them, one, trust them.
Mm.
Basically, your customers place more trust and value in the sales engineer than they do in you, unless you have a long-standing relationship. If you're a smart rep, you can leverage that. You know what I mean? Anyone out there who's listening, who's been an SE for more than 2 months, knows there are times a customer will tell you stuff they would never, ever tell the salesperson, right? And the smart salespeople know that, so leverage it. And then lastly, I'd tell the reps, like, let them go. You know, Mike had a comment there. Is it recommended that the SE accompany the rep on most contact points with the prospect? So if it's not going to interfere with your time, then, you know, two-headed sales calls are normally better than one, but there's no reason when, you know, in the old days, you'd walk into a building and you'd go on one call together, and then the SE would go make some individual calls and the rep would go make some individual calls, and they'd interweave throughout the day.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice. And don't pin them to the techies, right? Let your SE talk to whoever they can, and, you know, land and expand, as Salesforce say.
Yeah. And incidentally, I'm glad you called out Mike's question. I did want to get to that before we wrapped up. So what is your advice there? His question is it suggested or recommended that SE accompany the sales rep on most contact points with the prospect, not just discovery or demo? Do you have sort of a rule of thumb where that's concerned?
So depend on the type of transaction, right? I mean, if it's, so in the old days, if it was like a honking great big, you know, classic Oracle, HPCA type multi-million-dollar deal and 20% maintenance afterwards, you know, you'd kind of divide and conquer to some degree. If you're in a one and done SMB type environment, you know, normally you're both going to be on the same call at the same time because you've only got one shot. In the middle now, especially with, you know, the cloudification of everything, as I like to say, I think it really comes down to who's best at what. If your rep does a great job of, you know, business value discovery and sets you up, and you're satisfied with what you're given, then there's no reason for you to go on that initial discovery call. Sadly, somewhere around 70% of reps are not very good at it. So they need some coaching or training. Certainly, you know, for a demo or a presentation or a whiteboarding to a larger group, you never want to do that solo. Just because, you know, no man gets left behind, or woman.
Indeed.
So you need to show that as a team. But then all the other, like, meetings that you have, there's no reason that both you need to be on those meetings. If you trust the rep and the rep trusts you, and a lot of it just comes down to trust.
That and I've always said it's a cost benefit analysis, right? I mean, every engagement, we just need to do the cost benefit, you know, of the two-legged versus the four-legged or more, you know, sales call or visit.
Yeah.
So John, last question, and then we'll wrap things up. If you could ask me one question, what might that be?
Who's going to win the 4th at Belmont tomorrow?
I wish I could tell you, and I wish I could tell you with confidence and certainty.
Actually, let me flip it round. So, I mean, you probably see more demos than I do, because our business encompasses, you know, everything that an SE does. What do you think are probably the top 3 demo crimes, to use one of my old phrases, that you see day to day?
Goodness. I mean, we've talked about so many. First, I would say consistently people talk through the features and functions. And I do that, and I click here and I do this, and I click here and I do this, and it's all about the product. And I would say 70 to 80% of demos aren't very good, is my experience, sadly. That's the first. The second is I don't think many sales engineers, when they're under pressure, or when they're not intentional about answering questions, they don't know how to answer questions effectively. We need to be very intentional with how we handle questions and answer questions. We need to be very intentional with our demos. I don't think we're nearly as intentional as we should be. And I think so too much focus on the product, not knowing how to answer questions, and not reading the room, not making it a conversation, focusing all on what I'm going to say, and not approaching it like the conversation it should be. So and one of the things I like to talk about is I liken and this is an interesting analogy, I liken a demo to a railroad. Now, people are confused by that at first. I say, bear with me for a minute. When the demo starts, first of all, we want to make sure everybody's on the train. So let's get everybody on the train and set expectations. And then we're going to get to that first key moment and let everybody out. It's like getting to the first stop. We let everybody out and take a walk around and look around. Before the train leaves the station for the next stop, we want to make sure everybody's back on the train. And now let's go to the next stop. And now let's pause and let everybody out and take a look around, and then get everybody back. And there should only be about 3 key stops, right? 3 aha moments, right? And we want to make sure that everybody's along for the journey. So, and we just don't think of it that way. You know, we just want to get in the car and go. And we tend to leave people behind, and we don't even recognize it. So
we keep them on the train for 3 hours and don't feed them. Yeah,
exactly.
Love it.
So anyway, so those are, and to your point, you know, when people ask me that, you know, I'm very quick to and I'm doing, you know, like I wrote an entire book on all the mistakes that I made that I now see, you know, other people make. So anyway, great question. John, first of all, thank you so much for the time you've given. Any thoughts in closing? You've got 3 books out there that people can get. You've obviously your website. Where can people come find you, and what would you suggest that you know they or what would you encourage people to look at to get more from you?
Sure. So obviously there's the 3 books out there, and we always tell our clients, feel free to read the books. If you like what's in the books, then work with us. If you disagree with what's in the books, we're not going to change. That's our belief and our philosophy. It's out there, much as you have your philosophy, your 6 principles in your book. Visit the website. The website has a ton of useful resources on there around discovery, whiteboarding, which is one of the major things that we do, visual selling, SE leadership topics, a massive reading list. And we actually now deliver, I think, 25 different classes in 7 or 8 different languages around the world. So, there's no offense, more to an SE than just doing the demo. So we cover everything else as well, and all the different professional skills. So check it out, and feel free to download stuff, share within your SE team, and enjoy and employ whatever we've written.
Indeed. Well, John, thank you so much. Like I said, I mean, you and Peter are 2 of the people that I've looked up to for many years, and frankly, were probably an inspiration for me to get into this business. So thank you for everything that you've done. This is a very big market with, you know, there's more need here than any of us, I think, can satisfy. So hopefully what you and I have done will inspire other people to write books and enter this space as well. So
I hope so. As Peter, I will tell you, it was really lonely 15 or 20 years ago. So it's great that folks like you have come along, and the Pre-Sales Collective, and you know, we have books on POCs now and all kinds of cool stuff. It's awesome.
Indeed, it's a good time to be in this space.
Yes, it is.
John, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest
you,
of your week, and have a good year. And I'm sure we'll have you back sometime.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for the opportunity.
Cheers.
All right,
Bye-bye.
bye, Chris. Bye, everyone.